Donald Trump scoffed as he passed the ceremonial line. "These guys," he muttered, "never seen a battlefield in their life." Cameras caught it. The courtyard heard it. But what Trump didn't realize was that the man standing motionless before him wasn't just another soldier in a red coat. He was a battlefield veteran with a sealed service record, and a legal expert too. And when that same man took Trump to court, suing him for $100 million, he revealed something the world was never supposed to hear. And by the time the verdict came down, Trump's entire political legacy was hanging by a thread. Now, before we show you what came out in court, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, and make sure you're subscribed, because this one changes everything. The afternoon sun baked the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. Tourists clustered behind ropes, phones raised, whispering in a dozen languages, while the Red Guards stood motionless. Perfect posture, rifles cradled, bearskin hats casting shadows over watchful eyes. Among the crowd stood Donald Trump in his signature navy suit and red tie, surrounded by aides and security. He was in London for a diplomatic goodwill tour, mostly handshakes and photo ops to keep his name in headlines. As the group moved past the guards, one aide made a comment about the heat. Trump never could leave a space unfilled. "These guys," he said, loud enough for every microphone within 50 feet, "never seen a battlefield in their life. They just stand around like toys, glorified mannequins in fuzzy hats." The words hit the courtyard like a slap. Conversations stopped. Some tourists looked shocked. Others managed nervous chuckles. But one man heard every word with perfect clarity. Lance Corporal Thomas Wren, 46, Coldstream Guards, stood at attention exactly as trained. Not a muscle twitched. His bearing remained faultless. Heels aligned, jaw square, rifle vertical. Only his eyes shifted slightly as the insult settled between them. A senior officer's voice emerged from behind the line. "Let it go, Wren. He's not worth your breath." Wren didn't respond, just held the line unshaken while Trump's entourage moved on. But in the crowd, a teenage girl with dark hair watched the whole thing unfold. She wasn't looking at Trump or the ceremony. She was staring at her father, watching him do what he'd been trained to do for 23 years, stand perfectly still while someone tried to make him small. That evening, in a quiet Surrey kitchen, father and daughter faced each other across a wooden table. The clip hadn't gone viral, hadn't even made the news. Just another throwaway Trump moment, lost in digital noise. His daughter didn't speak until halfway through the silence. "You always told me," she said softly, "that silence can be strength." He looked at her, still in civilian clothes, but the posture never left him. "But if someone said that about your brothers in arms and you said nothing, what does that make you?" For a long time he didn't answer, just stared at his tea, steam rising into the warm air. Then, so quietly it was almost inaudible, he exhaled, and something inside him shifted. Thomas Wren had built his retirement around quiet. His Surrey cottage sat at the edge of a private estate where he tended grounds and managed hedges with military precision. No television in the bedroom, no social media. Just early mornings and the methodical work of maintaining order. The next morning he sat alone in his study, watching the clip again. Trump's voice came through clear. "These guys, never seen a battlefield in their life, just stand around like toys." Wren reached for his tea and missed the handle. The cup clattered against the desk, and a tremor, barely there, but real. He closed his eyes, and memories came flooding back. Kandahar, 2009. What everyone thought would be a photo op at a US command post, until intelligence broke about insurgents planning an attack during the ceremony. In full ceremonial kit, Wren had led 2 men through a drainage channel and flanked the attacker before he could reach the west wall. No shots fired. The assailant taken alive. Explosives neutralized. An American convoy rerouted minutes before driving into a kill zone. Wren never talked about it, never even accepted the commendation the Americans offered. But now he was listening to those same Americans laugh, while Trump dismissed it all as theater. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. Eleanor Pike, solicitor. 3 rings. Pike. Thomas Wren, Coldstream, retired. "Yes, Mr. Wren." I'd like to review a statement made by a foreign official on British soil regarding defamation and damage to military reputation. I'll see you Monday. Eleanor Pike was already in her Gray's Inn chambers when Wren arrived Monday morning. She pushed a slim binder across her desk. I've reviewed the footage, had a transcript certified. It meets the threshold. She opened to a highlighted section. The crux is this line: never seen a battlefield in their life. That's not satire. That's a categorical statement about a uniformed military officer. A demonstrably false statement. She turned another page. And toys in uniforms becomes legally actionable when applied to someone with documented combat decorations. You did receive battlefield commendation from the American Department of Defense, correct? Wren's look answered plainly. I turned it down. Even better. Makes you harder to dismiss as someone chasing glory. She leaned back. I'll file on two fronts. Reputational harm to your service record, plus punitive damages for undermining international military cooperation under Geneva provisions on bilateral recognition of valor. I'm not looking to humiliate him, I know, but if you don't respond, you're allowing it. Wren was quiet, then file it. 2 weeks later, the documents hit the UK High Court. Thomas Wren versus Donald J. Trump, seeking £100 million in damages. £1 symbolic, the rest punitive for undermining Allied sacrifice and presenting false claims about decorated military personnel. No media interviews, no press conference, just facts filed in triplicate. Trump's team responded predictably. A senior campaign advisor, speaking anonymously, some British toy soldier wants to play dress-up in court. Let him. This is election season. We've got real problems. But behind closed doors, Trump was briefed on Wren's actual service record. His response: never heard of him. Doesn't matter. If this gets traction, I'll show up and deal with it myself. When Pike told Wren that Trump would appear in person, he absorbed the news like a weather report. He'll try to turn it into theatre, she warned. Fine, so long as the court stays quiet. Grey clouds pressed down on London as the Royal Courts of Justice stood silent but tense. Outside, former Coldstream Guards in civilian coats stood quietly behind barriers. Not protesters, just witnesses. The courtroom filled early despite restrictions on cameras. Just legal pads and sharp pencils in the kind of silence that makes every sound significant. At 9:58 a.m, Thomas Wren entered. A charcoal suit, navy tie, infantry pin on his lapel. Eleanor Pike beside him with a single leather portfolio. His daughter followed, hair pulled back, hands folded. 2 minutes later, Trump entered through the side door. Navy suit, red tie, flanked by Secret Service and his lead counsel, Alan Wexler. He didn't glance toward Wren's table, just took his seat with practiced authority. Lady Justice Albridge entered and addressed the room without preamble. This hearing concerns a defamation claim filed by Corporal Thomas Wren against former US President Donald John Trump. We will proceed under standard civil procedure. Trump's counsel rose first, standing with the practiced ease of someone who'd performed this dance in dozens of courtrooms. Your Ladyship, Wexler began, his voice carrying just enough deference to sound respectful without seeming weak. We do not contest the authenticity of the remarks in question. Mr. Trump acknowledges making them. However, we submit that they fall firmly within the bounds of protected political commentary. Colourful language, certainly, perhaps even hyperbolic, but not defamatory under British law. He paused for effect, letting his words settle like dust. We further note that the claimant was not named personally, nor was his reputation targeted in any direct or malicious manner. The remarks were general observations about a ceremonial tradition, and therefore cannot constitute specific reputational harm to any individual. Lady Albridge made a note, her pen scratching against paper in the quiet courtroom. And yet, she said without looking up, the suit states that Mr. Wren's specific service record and battlefield experience were impugned by your client's characterization. Are you suggesting that no member of the Coldstream Guards could be individually harmed by such remarks? Wexler offered a rehearsed smile, the kind lawyers practice in mirrors. With respect, your ladyship, the Coldstream Guards are fundamentally a ceremonial regiment. Their duties, while undoubtedly honourable, are public-facing and symbolic in nature. In the gallery behind them, Wren's daughter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Eleanor Pike rose from her seat with the unhurried grace of someone who knew exactly what was coming next. "Your ladyship," she said, her voice carrying clearly without strain, "my client will demonstrate that while the uniform may be ceremonial, the man wearing it most certainly is not." Wexler raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying what he perceived as amateur theatrics. "We would welcome such evidence. Perhaps he'll regale us with stories of how standing perfectly still saved the Western world." A few quiet chuckles emerged from Trump's side of the courtroom. Trump himself didn't smile, just stared forward with the flat expression of someone watching a show he'd seen too many times before. Pike didn't react to the laughter, didn't even acknowledge it. "Let's do exactly that," she said simply. Lady Albridge gave a single nod. "Proceed, Ms. Pike." Thomas Wren stood. There was no change in his expression, no clearing of throat, no visible preparation for what was coming. Just a man rising to speak, not to defend his pride, but to defend history itself. "My name is Thomas Wren," he said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the courtroom without seeming to try. "I served 23 years in the British Army, 12 of those with the Coldstream Guards. I stood in silence at Buckingham Palace, yes. I also stood in bombed-out embassy compounds in Kabul, shoulder to shoulder with United States Marines." He looked directly at Wexler, his gaze steady and unblinking. "So yes, sometimes standing still does save the world." The courtroom fell into the kind of silence that seems to have weight, pressing down on everyone present like water at depth. Even Trump stopped staring into the middle distance. Lady Albridge made another note, her pen the only sound in the room. And for the first time since entering the building, everyone present understood they were witnessing something other than routine legal theatre. Pike approached the witness stand. "Corporal Wren, would you confirm your full military service?" 23 years, British Army, Coldstream Guards, 3 Iraq deployments, 2 Afghanistan, seconded to Joint Force Command in 2007 for embassy security and intelligence liaison. Voluntary retirement in 2015. Following your service. University of Law in Guildford, graduated 2019 with distinction. Now work as civilian legal consultant for a private estate and security contractor. When you heard Mr. Trump's remarks, how did you interpret them? As public dismissal of our actual service record, as devaluation of our ceremonial duties, and as false assertion that soldiers like myself weren't real military personnel? Did his comments feel personal? Wren took a breath. "Yes, because the uniform wasn't theatre to me. My bearing was trained, my posture was earned, and when I wasn't in full dress, I was wearing the same insignia under body armour, helping wounded American soldiers cross hostile terrain." Trump leaned toward his lawyer, whispering urgently. Wexler shook his head. "No further questions," Pike said. Wexler approached like a man testing water depth. "Mr. Wren, you acknowledge that many view the Royal Guards as primarily symbolic? The duties visible to the public are ceremonial. What happens beyond that depends on operational requirements. Then the public perception that Royal Guards stand around all day is fundamentally inaccurate. It's incomplete." Wexler sensed an opening. "You claim your commendations were defamed, but you haven't presented specific operations to this court. You've spoken only in generalities. Are you asking this court to simply trust your word without concrete evidence?" Wren turned to face the judge directly. "Your ladyship, I request judicial authorization to submit sealed operational documents, specifically Record 381-BR from the Ministry of Defense Archives, with privacy provisions under Joint Allied Operational Security Protocols. Is this material classified, Mr. Wren?" "Yes, ma'am. But I've received provisional clearance for limited judicial disclosure." The silence felt different now, heavier, charged with possibility. Pike spoke from her seat. "We request a brief recess for your ladyship to review the material in chambers." The judge studied Wren, then Trump, who had gone very still. "Very well, 45-minute recess. All counsel remain on standby." The gavel came down. Trump didn't stand immediately. He just stared at Wren with an expression that had moved beyond dismissal into something approaching concern. When court reconvened 52 minutes later, the atmosphere had undergone a fundamental shift. Not in volume, no gasps or excited whispers, but in something more essential. The air itself seemed denser, more serious, as if the room had suddenly understood it was hosting something more significant than routine litigation. Lady Albridge entered, carrying a manila folder marked with red security tape and an official Ministry of Defence seal. She didn't begin with pleasantries or procedural announcements. "This court has reviewed the submitted documentation in private session," she said, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. "Authentication has been verified through direct liaison with the Ministry of Defence and cross-referenced with Allied operational records." She opened the folder carefully, treating its contents with the respect reserved for documents that had been paid for in blood. What follows is a summary of the material, redacted only for ongoing national security considerations. The details pertain directly to this court's assessment of Corporal Wren's service record and the accuracy of the statements made by the defendant. A pen was set down somewhere in the gallery. Then, silence so complete, it seemed to pull sound from the room. Lady Albridge began to read. In October 2007, Corporal Thomas Wren was deployed to Kabul as part of a Coldstream Guard detachment, assigned to ceremonial duties and security liaison during diplomatic transition operations. Trump shifted in his seat, the movement barely perceptible, but somehow audible in the stillness. The unit's official designation was ceremonial support. However, they were dual-tasked with perimeter security and threat assessment following credible intelligence regarding potential attacks on diplomatic personnel. She turned the page with deliberate care. On the 14th of October, a coordinated assault was launched against the western perimeter of the United States Embassy compound. 2 Marines sustained severe injuries during the initial engagement. Afghan security forces failed to re-establish defensive positions. Wren remained perfectly still at the plaintiff's table, hands clasped loosely in front of him. The operational record confirms that Corporal Wren, armed only with a ceremonial rifle and wearing full dress uniform, crossed open ground under active hostile fire to reach the wounded personnel. Even the sound of breathing seemed to have stopped. Using materials available on site, he constructed an improvised evacuation harness and successfully extracted both casualties to a secure position. 1 Marine was transported on his back across approximately 200 meters of exposed terrain, while under continued enemy fire. Lady Albridge looked up from the document, her eyes finding Wren in the silence. The operation directly facilitated the survival of Staff Sergeant Michael Torres and Corporal David Kim, both of whom made full recoveries. Their intelligence regarding enemy positions and tactics subsequently informed counterinsurgency operations that prevented additional casualties among coalition forces. She turned another page. In recognition of these actions, the United States Department of Defense submitted a formal commendation request to the British government. The decoration was declined at the express request of the subject. Now, her gaze moved to the defense table, where Trump sat motionless, his usual expressions of confidence or dismissal nowhere to be found. "Corporal Wren," she continued, "is this account accurate?" "Yes, your ladyship." "Did you previously discuss these events in any public forum?" "No, ma'am. Only with those who needed to know for operational purposes." Pike rose slowly from her seat, holding a single sheet of paper. "If it pleases the court, we have received additional confirmation from the United States Department of Defense regarding this operation." Lady Albridge accepted the document and read it silently before speaking again. This letter, signed by Under-Secretary Martin Glennon, states, "Corporal Thomas Wren's actions in October 2007 were reported through official channels and remain documented within Joint Special Operations Command archives. Though formal recognition was declined at his request, his conduct was exemplary, and his contribution to American personnel safety is officially acknowledged. We thank Corporal Wren for his service and regret the circumstances that have made this acknowledgement necessary." She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the classified file. "Mr. Wexler, does your client wish to respond to this testimony?" Wexler had abandoned his stack of prepared questions entirely. His voice, when it emerged, sounded smaller than before. "No questions, your ladyship." The judge nodded once. "Very well, you may step down, Corporal Wren." As Wren returned to his seat, His daughter caught his eye from the gallery. She didn't smile or nod or offer any visible sign of approval. She just looked at him with the kind of steady recognition that passes between people who understand what dignity actually costs. Behind them, Trump sat in complete silence, staring at his hands. The man he'd dismissed as a glorified mannequin had once carried wounded Americans across gunfire in a ceremonial uniform, then refused a medal for it. It wasn't just heroic. It was the kind of service that made political theatre look exactly like what it was, noise signifying nothing. The courtroom held its collective breath as Lady Albridge closed the classified folder and set it aside. When she looked up, her expression carried the weight of someone who understood that the next few minutes would echo far beyond these walls. "This court has carefully considered the evidence presented," she began, her voice steady but sharpened by the gravity of what she was about to say. "The testimony, documentation, and official confirmations from both British and American military authorities." She paused, allowing the words to settle. "Freedom of expression is indeed a cornerstone of democratic society. However, that freedom does not absolve public figures, particularly those wielding significant political influence, from responsibility when their words inflict demonstrable harm on the reputation and dignity of others." Her gaze moved deliberately from the defense table to where Wren sat beside Pike. "This court finds that Mr. Trump's statements delivered on foreign soil during an official diplomatic visit did not merely criticize a ceremonial tradition. They constituted a direct assault on the professional integrity and battlefield credentials of a decorated serviceman whose contributions to international security have now been documented beyond dispute." Trump's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he remained silent. In characterizing Corporal Wren and his fellow guards as toys and mannequins who have never seen battlefield service, Mr. Trump did not engage in legitimate political commentary. He perpetuated demonstrably false information about individuals whose actual service records tell a profoundly different story. Lady Albridge's voice gained strength as she continued. "Moreover, these statements were delivered in a context that amplified their reach and impact. During a diplomatic event, captured by international media, and subsequently broadcast across multiple platforms. The harm to reputation was neither accidental nor contained." She reached for her gavel but didn't lift it yet. "This court hereby finds in favour of the plaintiff, Corporal Thomas Wren." There was no dramatic intake of breath, no outburst from the gallery, just a quiet settling, like dust finding its place after being disturbed. In recognition of both the symbolic and substantive harm inflicted, this court awards damages in the amount requested, £100 million. Of this sum, £1 represents symbolic compensation for the personal slight. The remaining 9,999 constitutes punitive damages, imposed not to enrich the plaintiff, but to establish clearly that attacks on military service, particularly false attacks on documented valour, carry consequences proportionate to their severity. She lifted the gavel now, holding it steady. "Actions have consequences, Mr. Trump. Words have power, and truth, once properly documented, cannot be dismissed as mere opinion." The gavel came down with quiet finality. "This hearing is concluded." The aftermath unfolded in slow motion, like frames of film projected at the wrong speed. Lawyers began collecting their materials with the careful movements of people processing an outcome none of them had quite expected. Court officials moved through their routine duties while the weight of what had just occurred settled over the room like afternoon shadows. Thomas Wren stood slowly, straightening his jacket with the same precise movements he'd used to adjust his uniform for over 2 decades. He offered a respectful nod to Eleanor Pike, then to the MOD liaison who'd sat quietly in the back corner throughout the proceedings. He didn't smile, didn't raise his arms in victory, didn't turn toward the gallery to acknowledge the supporters who'd gathered to witness this moment. He simply stood with the quiet dignity of someone who'd said what needed saying and was now ready to return to the life he'd built beyond the spotlight. As he turned toward the exit, his daughter rose from her seat in the gallery. They didn't embrace or exchange words of celebration. She just fell into step beside him, and together they walked toward the door with the measured pace of people who understood that real victories aren't measured in applause. Behind them, at the defense table, Donald Trump remained seated long after his legal team had begun to pack up their materials. His usual commanding presence had diminished somehow, as if the courtroom had slowly drained something essential from him over the course of the hearing. The man who'd built a career on never backing down, never admitting error, never allowing anyone else the final word, sat in complete silence, while the truth he'd tried to dismiss rearranged itself around him like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their proper places. For perhaps the first time in decades, Donald Trump had nothing to say. The corridor outside the courtroom buzzed with the subdued energy of people processing something unexpected. Legal clerks moved between offices with unusual haste. Journalists typed frantically on phones, trying to capture the significance of what they'd witnessed while it was still fresh in their minds. But away from the controlled chaos, near the ancient stone archway that led to the building's main entrance, an encounter took place that no cameras captured and no reporters witnessed. Thomas Wren was walking toward the exit, his daughter beside him, when a familiar voice called out from behind them. "Corporal!" Not loud, not aggressive, just a voice that had grown accustomed to being heard. Wren stopped and turned. Donald Trump stood alone near the corridor's side entrance, his security detail maintaining a respectful distance. Without the courtroom's formal setting, without lawyers and judges and official procedures, he looked smaller somehow, more human. The perfectly tailored suit still hung well, but something in his posture had changed. "I didn't know," Trump said quietly, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. "About what you did over there." Wren studied him for a long moment, taking the measure of a man who'd just been forced to confront the difference between perception and reality. "Most people don't," Wren replied simply. "That was always the point." Trump's jaw worked silently, as if he were testing words before speaking them. When he finally found his voice again, it carried an unfamiliar weight. "Those Marines you pulled out." "Torres and Kim," Wren said. "They went home to their families. That's what mattered." The two men stood facing each other in the quiet corridor, the weight of unspoken recognition hanging between them, like morning fog. No handshake was offered. No apology was spoken. But something fundamental had shifted in the space between dismissal and understanding. Trump nodded once, barely perceptible, then turned and walked away without another word. Wren watched him go, then continued toward the entrance where London waited beyond the medieval walls, carrying on its ancient business of enduring, adapting, and quietly honouring those who serve without seeking recognition. As father and daughter emerged into the overcast afternoon, the weight of what had happened settled around them not as triumph, but as completion. A story that had needed telling had finally been told. A truth that had been dismissed had been given its proper place in the public record. There were no cameras waiting outside. No crowds cheering or protesting. No headlines being born in real time. Just the sound of footsteps on stone and the particular kind of silence that follows when dignity has been restored, not through demand or performance, but through the simple act of speaking truth in a place where truth still matters. The black cab that had been waiting at the curb since early morning pulled forward as they approached. The driver, a man whose weathered hands suggested decades of London traffic, opened the door with a nod that conveyed more respect than most speeches. As the taxi pulled away from the Royal Courts of Justice, Thomas Wren settled back into the worn leather seat and allowed himself one small moment of satisfaction. Not at having won. He'd never been interested in winning. But at having finally given voice to a story that had waited years to be told. Somewhere across London, in hotel rooms and offices and secure phone calls to Washington, the reverberations of the day's events were already beginning to spread. Financial advisors were calculating the impact of a £100 million judgment. Political strategists were crafting damage control narratives. Media outlets were scrambling to understand how a routine defamation case had become something much larger. But in the back of a London taxi, travelling through streets that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, a father and daughter rode in comfortable silence, carrying with them the knowledge that sometimes the most important victories happen not in the glare of public attention, but in the quiet moments when truth finally finds its voice. And sometimes that's enough. What would you do if someone with millions of followers dismissed your life's service as a joke? If years of sacrifice were reduced to comedy by someone who'd never stood a single watch? Thomas Wren found his answer in a courtroom where silence spoke louder than any campaign rally ever could. This wasn't about politics or wounded pride. It was about the difference between what people see and what actually happens, between ceremony and service, between performance and protection. Sometimes the most powerful response to dismissal isn't anger or outrage. It's evidence. And sometimes dignity doesn't need to raise its voice to make itself heard. Here's what I want to know from you. Do you think all forms of service deserve respect? Even the quiet ones that never make headlines? Should Wren have let the insult pass, or was he right to fight back with the truth? And if you were watching someone mock the sacrifice of people who'd served alongside you, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. If this story changed how you think about the people standing guard in those red uniforms, people you might walk past without a second thought, go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe because we bring you stories like this one every single day. Real stories about real people who prove that heroism doesn't always come with fanfare. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we upload, because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Share this with someone who still thinks those ceremonial uniforms are just for show. Let them see what standing at attention really means. We've got another incredible story ready for you right now. Just click the video on your screen. Same powerful storytelling, same eye-opening truth about the people who serve in silence. Thanks for watching. And remember, not all heroes make headlines. Some just stand there and change everything.